The fluorescent lights hummed overhead at the Foot Locker in Pinebrook Mall, casting their familiar harsh glow across rows of sneakers and athletic wear. It was a typical Saturday afternoon in Pennsylvania, the kind where weekend shoppers drifted, through with shopping bags and restless teenagers looking for something to do before dinner. Kyle Brooks stood behind the counter, folding returned merchandise with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing retail for over a year. At 22, he'd graduated from community college with an associate's degree in business and was still figuring out what came next. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid rent on his studio apartment and kept him busy while he applied to 4-year schools. His co-worker, Chad Delaney, leaned against the register, scrolling through his phone with the intensity of someone trying to build a social media empire, one post at a time. Chad was 19, all energy and confidence, the kind of guy who live-streamed his lunch breaks and posted workout videos in his bedroom mirror. He treated every interaction like potential content, always looking for the next viral moment. "Dude, check this out," Chad said, holding up his phone to show Kyle a TikTok of someone pranking their grandmother. "This kid got like 2 million views just for putting plastic wrap over a toilet seat." Kyle glanced over politely, but didn't really engage. He'd learned that Chad's enthusiasm for internet fame was boundless and exhausting. The kid meant well enough, but he had that particular brand of confidence that came from growing up online, where everything was content and everyone was a potential audience. The store was moderately busy for a Saturday. A mother with twin boys tried to wrangle them near the children's section while they argued over light-up sneakers. A college-aged couple debated the merits of different running shoes, and an elderly man in a worn brown jacket browsed the walking shoes display with quiet deliberation. Kyle noticed the older man immediately, not because he stood out, but because he didn't. He moved with the measured pace of someone who'd learned not to rush, examining each shoe carefully, checking price tags with the kind of attention that suggested he was working within a budget. He wore pressed slacks despite the casual Saturday crowd, and a black baseball cap with simple white lettering that Kyle couldn't quite make out from across the store. What Kyle did notice was the small metal pin on the man's jacket lapel. It caught the fluorescent light as he moved, a purple, heart-shaped medal that looked weathered and authentic. Kyle's grandfather had served in Korea, and he recognized the significance immediately, though he'd never seen one worn in public before. Most veterans he knew kept their medals in shadow boxes or dresser drawers, too humble or too haunted to display them openly. The old man eventually selected a pair of modest New Balance walking shoes, black with minimal branding. He tucked the box under his arm and approached the counter, where Chad was still absorbed in his phone, thumb swiping through an endless feed of videos. "Excuse me," the man said quietly, setting the shoebox on the counter. Chad looked up with the practiced smile of customer service, though his eyes immediately drifted to the medal on the man's jacket. Kyle saw something shift in Chad's expression, a kind of curiosity mixed with skepticism that made Kyle's stomach tighten with an inexplicable sense of unease. "That it for you today?" Chad asked, reaching for the scanner. "Yes, sir," the man replied, his voice steady and polite. As Chad processed the transaction, Kyle noticed him glancing repeatedly at the Purple Heart, his expression growing more amused with each look. There was something in Chad's demeanor that reminded Kyle of a cat toying with a mouse, a predatory playfulness that made Kyle drift closer to the counter, ostensibly to straighten a nearby display, but really to listen. The store's background. Music seemed to fade as Kyle watched the interaction unfold, sensing that something was about to happen that couldn't be undone. The old man stood patiently, wallet in hand, completely unaware that his quiet dignity was about to be tested in a way that would change everyone in that store forever. "So what's that thing on your jacket?" Chad asked, nodding toward the purple heart as he scanned the shoebox barcode. His tone was casual, but Kyle caught the edge of amusement underneath. The old man paused, his weathered hands still holding his wallet. "It's a purple heart," he said simply. Chad's eyebrows rose, and he let out a small laugh. "Really? I mean, no offense, but people wear all kinds of stuff these days. TikTok's full of guys pretending to be Navy SEALs just for likes. That looks like something you could buy on Etsy." Kyle felt his jaw clench. He took a step closer, pretending to organize the impulse buy rack near the register, but really positioning himself to intervene if needed. Something about this felt wrong, fundamentally wrong, but he wasn't sure what to do about it. The old man's expression didn't change. He placed 2 folded $20 bills on the counter, his movements deliberate and calm. "I earned this in 1968, Kay-san." "That's Vietnam, right?" Chad said, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and wasn't particularly impressed by it. "Yeah, okay, sorry, sir, but that was like 100 years ago. I wasn't even born when Nirvana was a band." Kyle winced at the historical inaccuracy and the casual dismissal. He watched the old man's jaw tighten slightly, the first crack in his composed facade, but still he said nothing. Just stood there with a dignity that somehow made Chad's behavior seem even more grotesque. "Honestly," Chad continued, warming to his theme as he counted out change, "that kind of stuff, wearing it out in public, it's a little, I don't know, attention-seeking. I mean, if you were really in combat, wouldn't you be more quiet about it?" The question hung in the air like a slap. Kyle saw other customers beginning to notice the exchange, a young mother with her teenage daughter, an older couple browsing athletic socks, a college student trying on basketball shoes. Everyone was starting to pay attention, and not in a good way. The old man's response was barely audible. "Some things shouldn't be forgotten," Chad shrugged, clearly unconvinced. "Look, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I've seen videos like this before. Some old guy shows up, wears a fake medal, and thinks everyone should just bow down or something. It's always the same vibe." Kyle felt heat rising in his chest. His grandfather had taught him to respect veterans, to understand that the ones who talk the least had often seen the most. But he was just a sales associate, barely older than Chad, with no authority to stop this disaster from unfolding. The old man finished counting his change, his movements slightly slower now, as if each of Chad's words was adding weight to his shoulders. $74.95, he said quietly, sliding the bills across the counter. Chad took the money, still shaking his head with that same amused expression. "I mean, I get it. Everyone wants to feel special, but wearing military stuff when you weren't really there. That's stolen valor, isn't it?" The words hit like a physical blow. Kyle saw the old man's shoulders stiffen, saw his grip tighten on the receipt Chad was handing him, but still he didn't defend himself, didn't raise his voice, didn't create a scene. He just stood there, absorbing the disrespect with a grace that made Kyle's chest ache. "Have a nice day," Chad said, his tone now completely dismissive. The old man nodded once, picked up his shopping bag, and turned to leave. But Kyle could see it in his posture, in the way he carried himself. Something had been damaged in that exchange, something that shouldn't have been touched. As the man walked away, Chad pulled out his phone, already smiling at some new idea forming in his head. Kyle watched with growing dread as Chad's fingers moved across the screen, and he realized with horrible certainty that this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Kyle watched the old man walk slowly toward the exit, his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been there when he'd entered the store. But before he could reach the door, Chad's voice cut through the afternoon hum of the mall. "Wait up, sir," Chad called out, his tone bright with false friendliness. "I'm going live on Instagram. This is perfect content." The old man stopped, turned slightly, confusion flickering across his weathered face. Kyle felt his stomach drop as he watched Chad hold up his phone, thumb already tapping the screen to start a live stream. "Hey everyone," Chad announced to his phone camera, his voice suddenly animated and performative. "Chad here at work, and I've got something wild to show you guys. Check this out." Kyle stepped forward instinctively but stopped short. What was he supposed to do? Tell Chad to stop? He wasn't a manager, wasn't even a supervisor. He was just another sales associate watching something terrible unfold in real time. Chad approached the old man with his phone extended, the live stream already showing a handful of viewers. "So I've got this gentleman here who's wearing what he claims is a real Purple Heart from Vietnam. What do you think, Chad? Real or fake?" The old man stood perfectly still, his eyes moving from Chad's face to the phone camera and back again. Kyle could see other customers beginning to gather, some curious, others uncomfortable. A teenage girl near the sneaker wall had her own phone out, apparently recording the scene. "I don't want to be on camera," the old man said quietly, but firmly. Chad laughed, keeping the phone trained on him. "Come on, don't be shy. Tell everyone about your medal. Tell them about Vietnam." His tone was mocking, like he was talking to a child caught in a lie. "Please," the old man said, his voice barely audible now, "I just want to leave." But Chad was in full performance mode now, energized by the growing audience both online and in the store. "Look at this thing," he said, pointing the camera at the Purple Heart on the man's jacket. "Looks pretty convincing, right? But here's the thing, you can buy these online for like $20, eBay, Amazon, wherever." Kyle noticed more customers, stopping to watch, their expressions ranging from confused to disgusted. An older woman with grey hair was shaking her head in apparent disbelief. A middle-aged man in a business suit had pulled out his own phone, but Kyle couldn't tell if he was recording or calling someone. The live stream was gaining viewers rapidly. Kyle could see the numbers climbing in the corner of Chad's screen. Comments were flooding in, some laughing, others telling Chad to stop, but the attention was clearly intoxicating him. "I mean, no disrespect to real veterans," Chad continued, moving closer to the old man with his camera, "but this is exactly what stolen valor looks like. Old guy, fake medal, trying to get free drinks and thank yous for service he never did." The old man's hands were trembling slightly now, but his voice remained steady. "I served, I bled, I earned this," Chad scoffed, playing to his audience. "Right, and I'm a Navy SEAL. Come on, sir, just admit it's fake and we can all move on." Kyle felt something snap inside him. His grandfather's face flashed in his mind, remembering stories of Korea, of friends who never came home, of nightmares that lasted decades. But before he could say anything, he heard footsteps approaching from behind him. Heavy, measured footsteps that carried authority. Harold Strickland, the regional manager, was cutting through the crowd of customers, his face grim and his eyes locked on Chad's live stream. Kyle had only met Harold once during his hiring process, but he knew the man's reputation. Former military, zero tolerance for nonsense, the kind of leader who commanded respect without ever having to demand it. Chad was still talking to his camera, still mocking the old man, completely oblivious to the storm approaching from behind. The viewer count was climbing, the comments were getting more heated, and Kyle could see that this was about to become something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. The old man just stood there, absorbing the humiliation with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. But Kyle could see something breaking behind his eyes, some last vestige of hope in human decency being slowly crushed under the weight of Chad's performance. Harold was getting closer, his jaw set in a way that suggested this was not going to end well for Chad. The live stream was still going, the audience was still growing, and Kyle realized with crystal clarity that everyone in this store was about to witness something that would change them all forever. Chad was in his element now, the live stream showing over 300 viewers and climbing. Comments were flooding in, some egging him on, others telling him to stop, but the attention was clearly addictive. He held the camera closer to the old man's face, his voice getting louder and more theatrical. "Look at him, Chad. Look at that. Guilty expression. I'm telling you, this is textbook stolen valor. Probably gets free meals at Applebee's with this thing." The older man's composure was cracking. Kyle could see it in the way his shoulders sagged slightly, in the tremor that had developed in his hands. But what broke Kyle's heart was the look in his eyes, not anger, but a deep, profound sadness, like he was witnessing the death of something he'd believed in. "I was 19, the old man said quietly, his voice barely audible over Chad's commentary. 19 years old when the mortar hit our position. I carried 3 wounded men to safety before I collapsed from blood loss." Chad laughed, zooming in on the Purple Heart with his camera. "Great story, sir. Very dramatic. Did you practice that in the mirror?" That's when it happened. Without warning, without asking permission, Chad reached out and unpinned the Purple Heart from the old man's jacket. The fabric tore slightly as the pin came free, and Kyle heard the old man draw in a sharp breath. "Chad, no!" Kyle started forward, but it was too late. Chad held the medal up to his camera, grinning widely. "Look at this thing. It's actually pretty well made for a fake. Heavy, good detail work. Someone spent some money on this prop." The old man reached toward Chad, his voice breaking. "Please, give it back." But Chad was already pinning the Purple Heart to his own shirt, right over his Foot Locker name tag. "How do I look, chat? Think I can get some free coffee with this?" The live stream was chaos now, the comment section exploding with reactions, viewer count approaching 500. Some people were calling Chad a hero for exposing stolen valor. Others were calling him every name in the book. But Chad was drunk on the attention, completely oblivious to the human being standing in front of him, whose dignity he was destroying in real time. "Give it back," the old man said again, his voice stronger now, but Kyle could hear the desperation underneath. Chad posed for the camera, making exaggerated salutes and military gestures. "Sorry, sir, but I think I'll hang on to this for a while. Consider it evidence of your little scam." That's when Kyle saw Harold Strickland emerge from the crowd, his face a mask of cold fury. Harold was in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-suited, with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. Kyle had heard he was former Army, had served in Iraq, but had never seen him angry before. Harold's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "End the stream, now!" Chad looked up, startled by the authority in Harold's tone. "Oh, hey, Mr. Strickland, you're just in time to see this stolen valor situation I'm exposing. It's going viral." Harold's eyes moved from Chad to the Purple Heart, pinned to his shirt, then to the old man standing quietly beside them. Kyle watched Harold's expression change, saw recognition and respect flicker across his features as he took in the man's bearing, his age, the careful way he carried himself. "I said end the stream," Harold repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Chad hesitated, looking between Harold and his phone. The viewer count was over 600 now, comments pouring in faster than anyone could read them. This was the biggest audience he'd ever had. "But sir, this is important. People need to know about—" Harold stepped forward, and without another word, reached over and ended the live stream himself. The screen went black, the comments stopped, and suddenly the store felt very quiet and very small, Chad stared at his phone in shock.
That was going viral. I had over 600 viewers. Harold's attention was now entirely focused on the old man, whose eyes were fixed on the purple heart pinned to Chad's chest. Kyle watched Harold's expression soften as he stepped
closer to the veteran. "Sir," Harold said, his voice gentle but carrying unmistakable respect, "I believe this belongs to you." Without waiting for Chad's permission, Harold reached over and carefully unpinned the purple heart from Chad's shirt. He held it reverently in both hands like it was made of something precious and fragile. "Hey, you can't just—" Chad started to protest, but Harold's look silenced him immediately. Harold turned to the old man and, with both hands, carefully pinned the purple heart back onto his jacket. The gesture was performed with such reverence, such obvious respect, that Kyle felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for your service," Harold said quietly. The old man nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for understanding," Harold turned back to Chad, and Kyle had never seen anyone look so completely finished with another human being. "My office, now." In the cramped back office of the Foot Locker, Chad sat across from Harold Strickland, feeling smaller than he'd ever felt. In his life, the adrenaline from the live stream was wearing off, replaced by a growing sense that he'd made a terrible mistake. Harold closed the door and sat down, his hands folded on the desk between them. When he spoke, his voice was measured and calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been yelling. "Do you know what a Purple Heart is, Chad?" Chad shifted uncomfortably. "It's like a military medal. It's awarded to service members who are wounded or killed in action while serving with the U.S. military," Harold said slowly. "It's not given for bravery or heroism. It's given for bleeding, for sacrifice, for paying a price that most of us can't even imagine." Harold pulled out his phone and scrolled through it for a moment. "I've been doing some research while we've been sitting here. James Monroe, age 74, Marine Corps veteran, served in Vietnam from 1967 to 1969, wounded. At Khe Sanh in 1968 when his unit came under mortar fire. He was 19 years old." Chad's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I have contacts in the veteran community," Harold said. "It took me exactly 10 minutes to verify everything he told you, everything you called fake on your live stream." Harold turned his phone around, showing Chad a black and white photograph of a young Marine in dress uniform. The face was unmistakable. It was James Monroe, 55 years younger, but with the same steady eyes and quiet dignity. "This is from his service record," Harold continued. "He carried 3 wounded Marines to safety under enemy fire before, collapsing from his own injuries, spent 6 months in a military hospital recovering from shrapnel wounds to his chest and legs." Chad felt sick. "I didn't know—" "No, you didn't know," Harold agreed. "But you acted like you did. You called him a liar, a fraud, a fake. You stole his medal and mocked him in front of hundreds of people online." Harold leaned forward, his voice getting quieter, but more intense. "That man has probably carried the weight of what he saw and did in Vietnam for over 50 years. The friends he lost, the choices he had to make, the nightmares that never quite go away. And you turned his service into a joke for internet points." Chad couldn't meet Harold's eyes. I thought I was doing something good. Exposing."
"Stolen valor." "Stolen valor," Harold repeated. "Do you know what actual stolen valor looks like? It's people who lie about their service for personal gain. It's not a 74-year-old man quietly buying shoes with his legitimate medal on
his jacket." Harold pulled up another screen on his phone. "Your live stream has been screen recorded and reposted across multiple platforms. It's being shared in veteran groups, military forums, and social media pages. The comments are—" not kind, Chad's. Phone buzzed with notification after notification. When he looked at it, his social media accounts were flooded with messages. Most of them were angry, many of them were threatening, and all of them were calling him out for what he'd done. "I need to fix this," Chad said, his voice cracking. "I need to apologize." Harold nodded. "Yes, you do, but first, you need to understand something. This isn't about your reputation or your social media following. This is about a man who served his country and deserved better than what you gave him." Harold stood up and walked to the window overlooking the store floor. Kyle was still out there helping customers, but Harold could see him glancing toward the office periodically. "I'm suspending you for 2 weeks without pay," Harold said. "During that time, you're going to complete a mandatory course on military history and the cost of service. You're going to research the Battle of Khe Sanh and write a report on what Marines like James Monroe went through." Chad winced, but nodded. "Okay, yes, sir. And you're going to find James Monroe and apologize to him personally. Not online, not through a video, face to face." "How am I supposed to find him?" Harold smiled grimly. "Same way I did. Ask the right people, do the research, put in the effort. If you're half as good at investigation as you thought you were during your live stream, it shouldn't be too hard." Harold returned to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. "I'm also writing up a formal incident report. This goes in your permanent file and it goes to corporate. Your behavior today was unacceptable and there will be consequences." Chad stared at the paper, watching Harold's pen move across it. His phone continued to buzz with notifications, each one probably another angry message or comment. The viral fame he'd been chasing had turned into viral infamy, and he was starting to understand the difference. "Mr. Strickland," Chad said quietly, "I really didn't mean to hurt anyone." Harold looked up from his writing. "I believe you didn't mean to hurt anyone, Chad, but intention isn't the same as impact. That man left here today carrying more pain than when he walked in, and that's on you." Harold finished writing and handed Chad the suspension notice. "Use these 2 weeks to figure out who you want to be when you grow up, because the person you were today, that's not someone I want representing this company." Chad took the paper with shaking hands and stood up slowly. At the door, he turned back. Will Mr. Monroe be okay?" Harold's expression softened slightly. "James Monroe survived Vietnam, Chad. He'll survive this too. The question is whether you'll learn enough from this to make sure it never happens again." The video was everywhere by Monday morning. Chad had spent the weekend in his apartment watching his phone buzz with notifications he was afraid to read. But by Monday, he couldn't avoid it anymore. The screen recording of his live stream had been shared across every major social media platform,
veteran forums and news sites.
The hashtag #TruntRespectOurVeterans was trending, and his face was attached to it as the poster child for everything wrong with his generation. Local news stations had picked up the story. The headline on Channel 8's website read, "Foot Locker Employee Mocks Vietnam Veteran's Purple Heart in Viral Video." The reporter had managed to track down James Monroe, who had declined to be interviewed, but had confirmed through a family member that the incident had occurred and that his service record was legitimate. Chad's social media accounts had been flooded with thousands of comments, most of them angry. Veterans groups were sharing his video with their own commentary, and it was brutal. But what hurt the most were the messages from other young people his age, calling him an embarrassment and a disgrace. His parents had seen it too. His mother had called him crying, asking how she'd raised someone who could be so cruel to an elderly veteran. His father had been worse, cold, disappointed, telling Chad he was ashamed to be related to him. But the worst part was what Chad discovered when he started researching James Monroe as Harold had instructed him to do. The Battle of Khe Sanh had been one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War. Marines had been under siege for 77 days, constantly bombarded by enemy mortars and artillery. Chad found James Monroe's name in multiple historical accounts, a 19-year-old who had risked his life repeatedly to save his fellow Marines. In one account, Chad read about how Monroe had dragged a wounded Marine to safety while under direct fire, then gone back for 2 more men despite being wounded himself. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his chest, missing his heart by inches. He'd spent 6 months in hospitals, enduring multiple surgeries and learning to walk again. Chad found photographs from the battle, and they were horrific. Young men, barely older than Chad himself, covered in mud and blood, their eyes hollow, from things no teenager should ever see. Some of them never came home. Some of them came home, but never really left that battlefield, and Chad had called that man a fake. Meanwhile, Harold Strickland was dealing with his own aftermath. Corporate had seen the video and were demanding answers. The regional vice president had called 3 times, asking how one of their employees had been allowed to treat a customer, a veteran customer, with such disrespect. Harold had spent hours on the phone explaining the situation, defending his decision to suspend Chad rather than fire him outright. He believed in second chances, but he also believed in consequences. Chad would get his chance to make things right, but he'd have to earn it. The store had been busier than usual, but not in a good way. People were coming in just to see where the incident had happened. Some were veterans who wanted to show support. Others were curiosity seekers hoping to catch a glimpse of drama. Harold had to post a security guard near the entrance to manage the crowds. Kyle had been affected too. He'd been there, had watched it happen, and felt guilty for not stepping in sooner. He'd given his statement to Harold, describing everything he'd witnessed. The experience had changed him, made him more aware of the veterans who came into the store, more conscious of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Local veteran organizations had reached out to Harold, wanting to know what the company was doing to address what had happened. The VFW had issued a statement condemning Chad's actions and calling for better education about military service and sacrifice. But perhaps the most significant development came on Wednesday, when Harold received a phone call from James Monroe himself. "Mr. Strickland?" The voice was quiet but clear. "This is James Monroe. I was in your store last Saturday." Harold straightened in his chair. "Mr. Monroe." "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" "I wanted to thank you for what you did, for how you handled that situation. It meant more to me than you know." Aldi felt his throat tighten. "Sir, I owe you an apology. What happened in my store was unacceptable." "You're not responsible for that young man's actions," James said, "but you are responsible for how you responded, and you did the right thing." There was a pause. Then James continued, "I've been thinking about this all week. About that boy, Chad. He made a mistake, a big one, but I've been wondering what would be the best way to help him learn from it." Harold was surprised by the question. "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean, destroying his life won't bring back the respect he took from me. But maybe, if he's willing to listen, there's a way to turn this into something constructive." Harold leaned back in his chair, struck by the grace in the old man's voice. Even after being humiliated and mocked, James Monroe was thinking about redemption rather than revenge. "What did you have in mind, Mr. Monroe?" "I'd like to meet with him, if he's willing. I'd like to tell him about Khe Sanh, about the men I served with, about what that medal really means. Maybe if he understands the story behind it, he'll understand why what he did was wrong. Harold was quiet for a moment, processing the unexpected offer. "Sir, with respect, you don't owe him anything. What he did was inexcusable." "No," James agreed. "But maybe that's exactly why I should do it. Because someone has to show him a different way to be." Harold found himself smiling for the first time since Saturday. "I'll reach out to him, sir. If he's smart, he'll say yes." After hanging up, Harold sat in his office thinking about second chances, about the difference between justice and revenge, and about the kind of man who could respond to humiliation with grace and wisdom. Chad was about to get an opportunity he didn't deserve, but desperately needed. The question was whether he'd be wise enough to take it. The diner was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, just a few stragglers finishing late lunches, and the afternoon coffee crowd settling in. Chad sat in a corner booth, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He kept checking his phone, not for social media notifications, he'd turned those off, but for the time. James Monroe was supposed to meet him at 2:15. Chad had spent the past week reading everything he could find about the Battle of Khe Sanh, about the Vietnam War, about what it meant to serve. The research Harold had assigned him had become an obsession, a desperate attempt to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. He'd learned about the 77-day siege, about Marines who were barely out of high school facing an enemy that outnumbered them 10 to 1. He'd read about the constant bombardment, the fear, the way young men had to become killers to survive, then somehow find their way back to being human when they came home. If they came home. Chad had found James Monroe's name in multiple accounts of the battle, not as a hero, where the accounts were too matter-of-fact for that, but as a Marine who had done what needed to be done when his brothers were in danger, a 19-year-old who had run into enemy fire to drag wounded men to safety, who had bled and nearly died for people he'd known for only a few months, but who had become family. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Chad looked up to see James Monroe walking in. He was wearing the same brown jacket, but without the Purple Heart. Chad felt a pang of guilt, remembering how he'd torn the fabric when he'd ripped the medal away. James spotted Chad immediately and walked over, his gait still steady despite his age. He slid into the booth across from Chad without ceremony, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Thank you for coming," Chad said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. James nodded. "Harold said you wanted to apologize." "I do. I'm sorry, Mr. Monroe. I'm sorry for what I said, for what I did, for how I treated you. I was wrong, completely, horribly wrong." James studied Chad's face, his expression unreadable. "You thought I was lying." "I thought a lot of things," Chad said, looking down at his hands. "I thought I was smart, thought I was doing something good. I don't know what I thought, but I was wrong about everything." "Tell me what you learned," James said. Simply. Chad took a shaky breath. "I learned about Khe Sanh, about what you went through, about the men who died there, the ones who came home broken. I learned that you were 19 when you saved those Marines, just a few years younger than
I am now." Chad's voice cracked slightly.
"I learned that while I was making jokes about stolen valor, you were carrying the weight of real valor, real sacrifice, real loss, and I mocked it like it was nothing." James was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What else?" "I learned that the Purple Heart isn't given for being brave, it's given for bleeding, for paying a price that most people never have to pay." Chad looked up, meeting James's eyes for the first time. "I learned that you didn't wear that medal for attention or free drinks or thank yous. You wore it to remember, to honor the men who didn't come home." James nodded slowly. What else? Chad felt tears building in his eyes. I learned that I hurt you? Not just embarrassed you or made you angry, but actually hurt you. And I learned that there are some things you can't take back, no matter how sorry you are. That's right, James said, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. You
can't take it back?
That video of you mocking my service, calling me a liar, stealing my medal, that's out there forever. My grandchildren will probably see it someday. Chad felt like he was drowning. I know I can't fix it. I know sorry isn't enough, James leaned forward slightly. But maybe you can learn from it. Chad looked up, surprised by the shift in tone. I didn't come here to punish you, son. I came here to help you understand what you did and why it mattered, because if you can understand that, really understand it, maybe you can make sure it never happens again. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photo, creased and faded with age. He placed it on the table between them. It showed a group of young Marines, all smiles and bravado, arms around each other's shoulders. That's my squad, James said. K-San, 1968. I'm the one on the far left. Chad stared at the photo. The young man in the picture looked nothing, like the elderly veteran sitting across from him, just a kid with bright eyes and a cocky grin, barely older than Chad himself. Tommy Rodriguez, James said, pointing to the Marine next to him. Best friend I ever had, saved my life twice, made me laugh every day. He stepped on a mine 3 weeks after this photo was taken. James moved his finger to another face. Billy Patterson, kid from Ohio who wanted to be a teacher when he got home. Mortar round took him out during the siege. He was writing a letter to his girlfriend when it hit. Chad felt sick as James continued pointing to faces, telling stories of young men who had dreams and families and futures, all cut short by a war most people Chad's age knew nothing about. Out of 12 men in this photo, James said quietly, 4 of us made it home, and none of us came back the same. James carefully folded the photo and put it back in his jacket. When I wear that Purple Heart, I'm not wearing it for me. I'm wearing it for them. For Tommy and Billy and all the others who never got the chance to grow old, to have grandchildren, to buy shoes at a mall on a Saturday afternoon. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of loss and memory.
I can't undo what I did, Chad said finally. No, you can't, James agreed. But you can choose what you do next. You can choose to be better. James stood up slowly, preparing to leave. That live stream of yours has been seen by thousands of people. Most of them are angry at you, and they have every right to be.
But some of them are young people like you, people who might make the same mistake if they don't learn from yours. Chad looked up at him, not understanding. Make another video, James said. Tell them what you learned. Tell them about Tommy and Billy and what it really means to serve. Tell them that respect isn't just a word, it's a choice you make every day. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small American flag pin. He placed it on the table in front of Chad. Earn the right to wear this, he said. Not by pretending to be something you're not, but by becoming someone worthy of the sacrifices others made for you. James turned to go, then paused. And Chad, when you make that video, when you tell people what you learned, make sure you get it right this time. Chad sat in the empty diner long after James Monroe had left, staring at the small flag pin on the table. For the first time in his life, he understood the difference between earning something and just taking it. He pulled out his phone, opened his camera app, and began to record. Not a live stream this time, not a performance for an audience, but a confession. An apology, a promise to do better. It was the most important video he would ever make. 3. Months later, Chad Delaney stood in front of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., reading names etched in black granite. He'd driven down from Pennsylvania with Harold Strickland and Kyle Brooks, part of what Harold called continuing education. But what Chad knew was really a chance at redemption. The video Chad had made in the diner had gone viral too, but in a different way than his original livestream. Instead of mocking laughter and angry comments, it had sparked conversations about respect, service, and the cost of freedom. Veterans groups had shared it, not as an example of disrespect, but as proof that people could learn and grow from their mistakes. Chad had returned to work after his suspension a changed person. He no longer live-streamed from the store, no longer treated customers as potential content. When veterans came in and he'd learned to recognize them now, the way they carried themselves, the way they scanned rooms, the quiet dignity in their bearing, he treated them with the respect they deserved. He'd also started volunteering at the local VA hospital, reading to patients and helping with recreational activities. It wasn't penance exactly, but it was his way of trying to give back, to understand the continuing cost of service that lasted long after the wars ended. Kyle had been promoted to assistant manager, partly because of his steady work, but mostly because Harold had been impressed by how Kyle had handled the situation with Chad. Kyle had become something of a mentor to the younger employees, teaching them not just about retail, but about treating every customer with dignity. The store had changed too. Harold had implemented new training programs about customer service and respect, not just for veterans, but for everyone. The small sign thanking veterans still hung by the entrance, and customers still paused to read it, but now it felt natural rather than performative. James Monroe had become a regular customer again, though he and Chad had never spoken after that day in the diner. Chad would see him occasionally, browsing quietly, and they would nod to each other. Not friends exactly, but no longer strangers either. James had continued to wear his Purple Heart, and Chad had learned that some acts of quiet courage happened every day in the simple decision to carry on with dignity despite the weight of memory. The flag pin James had given Chad that day in the diner sat framed on Chad's nightstand at home. He hadn't worn it yet, didn't feel like he'd earned that right. But it served as a daily reminder of the difference between respect that was demanded and respect that was earned through actions. Standing now at the memorial wall, Chad found the names James had told him about: Thomas Rodriguez, William Patterson, and dozens of others from Khe-Sanh. He traced their letters with his finger, trying to imagine the young men in that faded photograph, trying to understand the weight James Monroe carried every day. Harold appeared beside him, quiet and respectful. "You know," Harold said after a while, "I've been thinking about that day in the store, about second chances and what they mean." Chad looked at him, waiting. "I could have fired you," Harold continued.
Probably should have.
"But James Monroe taught me something about grace that day, about the difference between justice and wisdom." "I still don't think I deserved a second chance," Chad said quietly. Harold smiled. "That's exactly why you did deserve it. Because you understand now what you didn't understand then, that some things are bigger than we are, and we're responsible for how we treat them." As they walked back toward the car, Chad's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a young man in California who had seen Chad's apology video. The message was simple: "Thank you for helping me understand. I almost made the same mistake you did." Chad showed the message to Harold, who nodded approvingly. "That's what redemption looks like," Harold said. "Not just learning from your mistakes, but helping others avoid them." On the drive home, Chad thought about James Monroe, probably at home with his family, carrying memories that would never fade, but also carrying the quiet satisfaction of having turned a moment of disrespect into a lesson about honor. He thought about the power of silence, of dignity in the face of mockery, of grace that could transform both the giver and the receiver. Chad's social media following had actually grown since his apology video, but now his followers were different. People, veterans, families of service members, young people who wanted to learn about respect and service. He posted rarely now, and when he did, it was thoughtful content about history, about sacrifice, about the ongoing cost of freedom. He never live-streamed again. Back at the store the next week, Chad was helping an elderly customer find comfortable walking shoes when he noticed the man's jacket. A small pin, barely visible, marked him as a Korean War veteran. Chad didn't point it out, didn't make a show of recognition, just provided the best service he could, treating the man with the dignity he deserved. As the customer left, Kyle approached Chad. "You handled that well," he said. Chad shrugged. "Some lessons you only need to learn once." That evening, Chad sat at his computer working on something new. Not a video, but a written piece about the Battle of Kaysan, about the young Marines who had fought there, about the cost of service and the weight of memory. It was for the local newspaper's Veterans Day edition, part of his ongoing effort to educate rather than entertain. As he wrote, Chad thought about the young man in that faded photograph, barely 19 years old, grinning at the camera with no idea what lay
ahead.
He thought about the weight of carrying those memories for over 50 years, about the choice to wear a purple heart, not for attention, but for remembrance, and he thought about the power of silence, of dignity, of grace in the face of mockery. James Monroe had taught him that some battles are won not by fighting back, but by standing still and letting your character speak louder than any words. It was a lesson Chad would carry for the rest of his life, a reminder that respect isn't something you perform for an audience. It's something you live every single day, one choice at a time. The small flag pin still sat in its frame, waiting for the day Chad would finally feel worthy to wear it. But he was no longer in a hurry. Some things he had learned were worth waiting for. Some things were worth earning slowly, with patience and humility, and the quiet understanding that the most important audiences are often the smallest ones. In the end, that was James Monroe's final gift to him. Not forgiveness, but the knowledge that redemption was possible for those willing to do the work of becoming better than they were. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching
from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.